Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here. As you saw in the course webpage, this is a video you can watch at any point. Just have it done by Sunday night at midnight, along with the exit ticket that also accompanies the lecture content. There's going to be a lot in here that probably is familiar to you, or at least the concepts are familiar to you. The important part of this is just re-engaging with those concepts to make sure that you're utilizing some. So while I don't think that you're going to be overwhelmed with new content in this particular lecture, I do hope that you choose to think about what your own stress level is and what your own stress reduction practices are. So let's start off with we'd looked at some data from the American Psychological Association last time we talked about stress, when we were just talking about how does the stress response trigger? How is it initiated? How does it lead to long-term disease, etc.? So there were a couple of things out of that article that I wanted to just come back to here as an initiation point for dealing with identifying stress reducing techniques. So there's nothing super insightful here, but again, these are like meant to be mostly important reminders rather than new information. If you're feeling overwhelming and stressed consistently, pay attention to why. See if you can identify what are the main trigger or triggers. They could be people, they could be places, they could be events, they could be tasks, they could be relationships. But the more you can identify what are some of your biggest stressors, the more chance you have to be able to deal with them. So as you learn your stress signals, that also pay attention to what are the beginning feelings? Instead of when you're overwhelmed with stress, what are the beginning sensations and feelings for you? So that you can start to recognize as early as possible, like, okay, I'm starting to get stressed out. I'm starting to experience stress. I want to I want to stop it. I want to intercept it. I want to deal with it. It's also really important to recognize that we all deal with stress. Like every single one of us has stress and every single one of us deals with stress. And my guess is that most of the ways that you deal with stress are probably pretty healthy. But you may have some, I think we all have some that are less healthy. So identify what your own unhealthy coping mechanisms are and really pay attention to when you engage in those. Like if you know that, man, when I get stressed, I just suddenly start eating all kinds of junk food and my stomach doesn't feel well and I'm not sleeping. Well, if the beginning of that narrative was that you're craving junk food a lot, but that's just not something that you normally engage in because you're attentive to maybe you're an athlete and you're attentive to your performance but when you get stressed, that just sort of slips away. And then as soon as you start feeling those cravings to be eating unhealthy, then you can start to know, okay, this is when I'm experiencing more stress. Now, what the heck is causing it? And what the heck could I do about it? I think you already have healthy ways to manage stress. If you don't, though, then I'm going to give you some options. I'm going to give you some good options, some great options, and pick the ones that really work well for you. Just because they're great options don't mean they're great for you. So last, I would say is just make sure that you're not facing stress and feeling overwhelmed in isolation. Make sure you have friends, you have family, you have your faculty and others here at George Fox. You have a huge support network. But until they know that you need them, they oftentimes want to respect your independence and don't step in as fast as sometimes may be more helpful. So stay connected with other people. Don't isolate yourself. That seems to make everything feel more difficult rather than less difficult. So if we can figure out what our stressors are, then we can begin to try and eliminate some of those, or at least to manage some of those. We talked about last time that the perception that you're stressed is what triggers that entire stress response. So when you can figure out what it is that makes you start to feel stressed, then you can start to either change the way you approach that situation, you can try to modify that situation, or you can try to avoid that situation. One of the things that could be cause of stress is just the simple scale of the number of things that you feel like you need to accomplish. If that's the case, is it possible for you to decrease your responsibilities? Can you focus more on what are the bigger priorities for you rather than all of the things that you have committed to and that you continue to commit to or say yes to? Sometimes there are areas where your level of wanting to achieve perfection is really causing challenge. I think you should pursue excellence in everything, but you're never going to be perfect. And maybe it's time, at least in some spaces, to try and identify you're pursuing excellence. And you're going to try and do excellent work, but you're not going to hold yourself to a standard of perfection. Again, I said that other people really want to help you, so ask for that help. And the reality of all of our lives is there's going to be times that are higher stress and there's going to be times that are lower stress. You should never really be expecting that you're going to live a stress-free life. That doesn't exist. But when those seasons of lower stress come, use those as a chance to recharge, to build up some stress resistance, to work on some of those self-care habits about I'm building the routine and the expectation of being active, of being outdoors, of seeing people. Use those types of times to build some of those habits that are going to be so much more productive for you when time feels more scarce. Now, the APA will also highly recommend that you should be paying significant attention to your diet because your diet is going to impact dramatically the way you feel, the way your mind works, thus the way that you approach situations, and then from that, whether you feel triggered or not triggered during similar situations. So we know stress had an impact on the GI. We looked at that some last time we looked at stress. Those symptoms can look like nausea or bloating or even just general distension or pain. We also talked about the release of cortisol, and we talked a little bit about its relationship with insulin and blood sugar levels. But as we have this release of cortisol from long-term stress, it really makes us just sort of want and desire sugary, fatty foods, which continue a cycle because as that high sugar food goes into our bloodstream, then it spikes our insulin and then our blood sugar crashes, and then we have to balance that out by craving or replacing it with more sugars. And there's a cycle there that's challenging and one that we frequently fall into. So just be aware, we talked about visceral fat before. That's the fat that's stored around the organs. This cortisol, that hormone that we talk about as a stress hormone, along with this continued sugar intake and high fat intake, will really increase the likelihood of you storing fat as visceral fat, which just has a whole bunch of long-term health problems um, that are above what would happen even if that same amount of fat was stored, but was stored as subcutaneous fat. So if we're eating good food for us, we're eating really nutritious food, then that's going to help to reduce that inflammatory process. And that inflammation is something that we've talked about over and over and over again. Another aspect you can do to help to remove that inflammation is just to get everything flowing well. So make sure you stay hydrated. And staying hydrated means staying hydrated with water, not staying hydrated with energy drinks. Those energy drinks should be removed from your habits. That is not a healthy way for you to continue retaining or getting your hydration. Neither is alcohol, so try to avoid alcoholic consumption. It's totally okay for you to enjoy some of your favorite foods, but just recognize if that's happening out of a craving standpoint that you're sort of giving into. There's a difference between I'm desiring something and I'm really looking forward to something and the sensation like I need to have this or this is what's going to make me feel better. If it's a this is what's going to make me feel better, then it still can be okay to give into that. But first think about, okay, why do I need to feel better? What is it that's really stressing me out? What could I do about that? Because I can make myself feel better too. I mentioned again the need for social support, and I really think that this is super important. Um, you have a lot of people who care a lot about you, and some of them have different abilities to support you. Some individuals in your life are going to be great at listening. They're going to be great at understanding where you're coming from because they're in the midst of similar experiences, or maybe they've had similar professors, if that's part of the trigger, or coaches, or whatever it may be. Others are still going to want to listen or still be good at listening. They just may not have the same reference point or the same perspective, but they might be better able to offer some kind of tangible supports. So there's different ways that everybody helps us. And people want to help you. I think that when we get really stressed, we have a tendency to think that I just need to get this done by myself, or I don't have time to share, or I just, um, and then I'm going to get it all done. And there may be a better way. So experiment with other options. Include that idea of social support into that repertoire of other options. And don't forget, God can help with either giving you perspective about what's the true significance of the event or challenge that you're facing, or by actually changing the circumstances. God can help. So don't forget to engage with your faith. Now, let's look at some tangible actions that you could partake in that are proven to reduce your stress levels. The first one we're starting with is progressive muscle relaxation. And progressive muscle relaxation is this practice of intentionally relaxing your tight muscles. We talked about one of the very first symptoms that arises for a lot of individuals who are experiencing stress is a tightness of muscles. And oftentimes that expresses itself in a tightness in the shoulders and in the upper neck, and sometimes leads on to headaches and even migraines for individuals. So the individual who sort of started to develop this practice was a physician who was recognizing that that symptom of muscle tension was common to so many of his patients that were experiencing stress, and then that was continuing on to some pretty significant chronic diseases. So he wanted to experiment with, if muscle tension is such a common symptom or common sign that the person's experiencing stress, what if we start to remove that muscle tension? So progressive muscle relaxation traditionally starts with beginning at the toes and the feet, and then muscle group by muscle group moving up your body until you get all the way to the top. Most common practices just ask you to find a comfortable position. You can see individuals in this illustration are laying down, but it could be in a seated position. You could be standing if you wanted, just whatever you feel is comfortable. General protocols, there's all kinds of different protocols, but if you want to experiment with this, or if you've used it in the past and you remember, oh, that actually did feel good when I got done, but now I forgot all about it. A general protocol to sort of experiment with at the outset would just be intentionally contracting your muscles as tight as you can for about 10 seconds, somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds. We don't want to get to any point where you're feeling any kind of cramping or anything like that. So anytime you start to feel um, that sensation that it's moving into an uncontrolled contraction, then relax, ease yourself out of it right away. But starting at the toes or so, you're going to muscle group by muscle group, tell yourself that you want to contract that muscle group for somewhere around 10 seconds. Push as hard as you can. Just create as much tension as you can. And you're paying attention, you're focusing on what is that sensation of muscle tension feel like, so that you can get better sense of when you start to feel muscle tension from stress. Then you're going to consciously tell that muscle group to fully relax, completely relax. And this is one of the reasons that a standing position is not usually utilized, but rather a seated or a lying position is typically utilized. As you allow the muscle group to relax, the biggest, most important thing, in my opinion, for muscle relaxation is as you tell that muscle group to relax, consciously and intentionally tell that muscle group to relax, keep your entire focus on the sensation of relaxation, of the sensation of that muscle tension slipping away, because it's that sensation and it's that action that you're trying to teach yourself to recreate. You want to be able to identify as early as possible when muscle tension is starting to build up, and you want to, as easily as possible, be able to tell your body just to relax. So focus a lot on that sensation of just letting go. And what does it feel like to have your muscles relax? Okay. You see here in the slide, there's also a protocol called passive progressive muscle relaxation. It's essentially the same thing, other than you're just not doing a tensing phase. So you put your attention towards a muscle group at a time, but you just tell it to fully relax. I think that the preceding, the progressive muscle relaxation, builds more awareness, because it helps you build both awareness of both types, both of muscle tension and of muscle relaxation. So from my perspective, that's the one I would promote first, but both may be something you want to experiment with. Another one you shouldn't be experimenting with, but you should in fact be following through on, is making sure you're getting good sleep. There is little else you can do for your body besides eating well and protecting your sleep that are going to protect both your mind, your thoughts, your ability to remember, your ability to learn, and your emotional state, as well as your physical body. So we definitely know, I bet you've experienced that when you get stressed, it's possible you have really poor sleep, or that you push yourself through when would normally be your sleeping period because you're trying to accomplish something. And when we distort or disrupt our sleeping practices, it can really make stress worse. So, really general tips for a restful, more sleep filled night would be get some exercise during the day, make yourself a nighttime routine. That should include putting screens away at least 30 minutes, but preferably more like 60 minutes before bedtime. That nighttime routine means just like, I do this every night before I go to bed. So it could be that you have your shower, that you're brushing your teeth, that you get your pajamas on, that you get into bed and do your devotional, that then you go to bed. Whatever your routine is going to be. But your routine should try to avoid those screens immediately before bed. And don't try to stay away from caffeine and alcohol, especially in the afternoon and the evening. For many people, they find meditation is something that also supports their ability to go to sleep. You could utilize the muscle relaxation techniques that we talked about just briefly in here. But create a routine that is commonplace for you, that helps your body and brain know, okay, we're getting ready to go to bed. We're getting ready to go to sleep. I'm going to get to sleep and go to sleep. As opposed to those nights where you've gone to bed, you've laid in bed, and you just keep thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, oftentimes about the same one or two things, and it just feels like you cannot fall asleep. One of my personal favorites is there's been multiple research studies that actually show just getting outside has a huge impact on your stress levels. Just getting outside. So you can use time in nature for just activity, for exploration, for exercise, for meditation. We also have studies that show us that vitamin D production, which is something that naturally occurs as you're exposed to sunlight, even doesn't have to be sunshine, but as you're exposed to sunlight, helps to increase your mood. And ideally, it's going to be a good reason for you while you're outdoors to just want to practice being in the moment, to practice not being in your screens and to bring your attention to where you're at and what you're doing and what you're seeing and God's creation around you, as opposed to carrying anxieties from the past or into the future about what's going to be happening or what will happen, what did happen. So while this is an activity that I enjoy, going out into nature, something that I definitely enjoy, it may not be for you. So find activities that you do enjoy. Finding things that in your leisure time are actually important to you and that make you feel recharged, that give you a time away, a break from just sort of thinking about the other stresses and challenges and responsibilities that you have. Unfortunately, when we get stressed and time crunches become larger, we often discard the leisure time activities first. And that might not actually be the best idea because those leisure time activities don't have to necessarily be long time in duration, but they do give you a mental break and they give you an emotional recharge. So find the things you really love and do it with the people you really like. Um, this is really going to help with stress reduction, with allowing you to bring more focus and attention back to the projects when you return to them. So really, I want you to think about what are some activities you really like. And this is where in your exit ticket, you're going to see, I posed one question. I said, say what? And here's what I want you to answer. Within your exit ticket, I want you to tell me what are your 3 favorite leisure time activities. So when it says say what, I want you to tell me what are your 3 favorite leisure time activities, and they can't include sleep. Sleep something that you should already be invested in appropriate times and with appropriate practices. So say what? You might want to finish that out. Let's move into some very popular topics at the moment, mindfulness and meditation. We continue to find that the more that a person brings their attention to the moment and brings their focus to the moment and the activities that they're engaged in, that their sense of anxiety in particular seems to decrease. The less that we keep our mind from rehashing events or comments or experiences from the past and the pains that those things may have caused, and the less that we project what we are fearful might be happening in our future or what might not be happening in our future, and instead of either of those two options, pay attention to just what's going on around us in God's creation, it turns out that we're built to live life that way. So, meditation and mindfulness both approach this skill or both feed into this skill. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can practice meditation, a tremendous variety. It is costs nothing. It actually is repeatedly proven to be effective. And you can do it while moving or while, if you prefer more stationary versions, you can be moving or not. The the basic things that I would say both of them share in mind is that they're really working to try and control your attention. And as you think about all of the massive number of stimuli that you are attentive to, from all of the things that are going on around you to all of the electronic information that's out there that could be drawing your attention to all of the prompts that our electronics want to send to us as those businesses try to get our attention to move to their spaces. Controlling your attention and just increasing your awareness of what's going on around you and how you feel within the moment about what's going on around you. Those are some of the biggest things that I think that both meditation and mindfulness offer for us. Whether that should be done in a completely non-judgmental way or not, I would have some comments on. So if you're interested, we can talk about it. Or if you want the stress management class, I would deal with this too. But I think that there's a lot of benefit to be considering, to be training essentially your own mind to better be able to focus. So as we look a little bit deeper at stress and mindfulness with the I forgot to put down which authors I use this for. Shoot. With the article done by Bomber and Schneider that you can see within the resource list at the back here, they were looking at trying to identify how effective is meditation and mindfulness. So they looked at a wide array of research studies. They did a lit review. They looked at almost 60. They found 57 studies that fit their criteria. They were looking at and utilizing a common definition as stress being the perception that a situation or event exceeds your coping resources, that you feel like, okay, I'm facing something that I'm not sure I can handle, that's out of my control, or that I don't have the ability to deal with. Now, within those 57 studies, as they were looking over the commonalities of those studies, the most commonly reported causes of stress to college students are not going to sound unfamiliar to you. They have these three: living away from family for the first time, changes in your social life and having to leave the friends that you've had for years and years and years and move into spaces where you don't know anybody or you know very few individuals. And then the just challenge of academics within higher education. So across these studies, did they find mindfulness and meditation to be helpful? Yeah, they did. Really helpful. So across all of those different studies, they found that mindfulness practices help to decrease stress in almost 80% of the studies' reportings, and anxiety was just about exactly the same. So for most people, you are going to see a change if you choose to engage with meditation or mindfulness. Now, you'll notice it's not everybody, it's not 100%. So, again, think about what of these different practices are more appropriate to your personality and what are more effective. If you haven't experimented with any and you don't feel like you have any good coping strategies, then this could be a great one. This could be a great place to start. It's a very low cost, it's no cost. It's wide array of options. There's a lot of supports out there to be engaged in it. I think on the previous one here, like Headspace and Calm being the two largest providers for app material around there. So another piece that I wanted to bring up is when we talk about mindfulness, promoters for mindfulness will often talk about it in two phases, essentially. They'll talk about state mindfulness and trait mindfulness. And state mindfulness just means that sort of that immediate response, that state of mind that occurs right after a meditation session, just the changes in the way that you feel that are immediate, but also a bit short term. If you continue to invest and build your skill, your attention, your focus, your awareness with these practices, then that transitions from a simple short-term outcome to a much more impactful long-term outcome, which we refer to as trait mindfulness. So this is actually mapped and indicated by physical changes in the brain that take place. So we actually see structural activity begins to change in the brain. We see that the more individuals practice meditation, the less anxiety, the less perceived stress, the less situations where they feel distress occur. And people score higher on creativity scales. They score higher on flexibility scales or cognitive flexibility scales. They score higher on stress resistance scales. So there's some really positive long-term benefits, but while you'll experience some right away, they'll also be somewhat short-term. So to be able to experience the prolonged benefits, you also have to be committed towards building these skills and abilities within your own mind. Um, Exercise is one that I think is pretty common to your age group. That as we get older, oftentimes this is one that begins to fall away. So if this is something that you find to be really effective for you right now and really important to you right now, hold on to that feeling, hold on to that sensation, and pay attention to if it begins to erode or if your own practices about whether you're engaging in exercise begin to erode. That's probably a better way to say it, because this is really valuable, not only for stress reduction, but just for general health. So we know regular exercise is going to help with sleep quality. We know it's going to help to decrease stress. We know it's going to do all kinds of other incredibly profoundly important things towards building your long-term health. It's going to help to reduce both acute and chronic stress. There is so much that physical activity does for us, and it does not need to be, the slide here shows an individual going for a jog, but it does not need to be going for a run or for a jog. Exercise can take so many varied forms that you should be finding the forms that you really like, types that you really enjoy. So not only are we going to help with stress, we're going to help with reducing cardiovascular disease and the signs and symptoms associated with the development of that disease. We can see that it's having a physiologic impact on our bodies because of that decrease in blood pressure, that decrease in heart rate. And we also can measure cortisol levels. Remember that quote unquote stress hormone, and see that though that hormone's actually being reduced when people regularly engage in exercise. So we know you can, even after a single exercise session, you can actually reduce your blood pressure. And a lot of that, so even just a single bout of exercise can be helpful. And a lot of that appears to be likely mostly because we're decreasing your vascular resistance. Your heart rate is not really going to be changed after a single exercise session. Instead, it's going to be more the amount that your vascular system goes from a constricted state towards a more open state. So we also know that there are some chemical messengers that you've heard of probably called endorphins that are released after exercise that change the way that we feel and change our mood. We see that those things seem to be maximized after about 20 minutes of vigorous activity, which in most research studies is defined as about 75% or more of your heart rate max. But for those that don't feel they can maintain that level of exertion for that long, even 30 minutes of moderate exercise, which is significantly lower intensity, leads to very similar impacts. So again, I really think exercise is probably something that you're already engaged in. You may have experienced phases of your life, however, where school got really busy, where your work schedule got really busy, where there were other commitments that were just keeping you feeling like you didn't have enough time. And if you think back to those phases, did exercise drop away? Because that is what appears to happen with adults oftentimes as you move into spaces where maybe the culture towards being active is less. There's less encouragement from others around you just by example and invitation to be engaged in exercise. It may be that the spaces where you can be performing exercise are more challenging to get to. So it's not that you're just on campus and need to walk 2 buildings over to go to Hadlock, but instead you have to drive 5 or 6 miles to get to the gym that you want to utilize. Whatever it may be, just be aware, even a single exercise session can really help to improve your stress reduction, to decrease your stress response. So if you're facing exams or presentations or job interviews, these are ways to help deal with very immediately about how you're feeling, how you're responding. So don't forget, you got your exit ticket, should be done by Sunday night at midnight. You got your say what question, and the last slide just shows your references. So hope you have a great weekend. I look forward to seeing you next week, and thanks for being here. I appreciate it.